let's get back to the presentation. Hope you enjoyed this. Okay, let's get started. Thank you very much for everyone joining this session, and especially it is like 8:30 a.m. and first session on third day in Las Vegas. I know it's not easy to get up in the morning and come in the session. And also the part that if you went to the bar and if you took any shot, and like yesterday we with the friends, and note to self that never listen to the folks for and taking some shot which has the Red Bull. It kept us awake like 3 a.m. and like we were with the alarms, snooze and everything. We made sure that we are here at 8:30 for you guys. Anyway, so the topic we are going to talk about is the top 10 lessons learned from managing SQL and reporting. One thing which got stripped out from the title, it was managing configuration manager. So I just want to clarify that all the things we are going to talk about is related to the SQL and configuration manager. However, if someone is here for attending just native SQL, we are going to talk about the things but may not apply for non-config manager related scenarios. So just to clarify and set expectation. Now, to start with the introduction, I'm Sitanshu Verma. I'm a service engineering manager, and my team is primarily responsible for managing all configuration manager related services at Microsoft IT. Along with me, I have our SQL guru, who is doing the primary talk in this session.
Hi, I'm Benjamin. I don't know if I wanted to say anything else.
Good. And
it's a little bit too early.
Big applause for Benjamin. He is doing his first session in MMS this year, so that's a big. And
not nervous at all.
The other secret which Benjamin doesn't know, which I'm going to share with you all, is here, the next slide. He's very popular in our team, and if you see the picture, here's Benjamin just doing some picture. If something breaks, we know who broke it.
What's the fun in testing?
Let's get started. So what is the objective? I have the core objective of this session is to share what we have learned in managing like Microsoft IT environment, which has like 300,000 PC we manage, and what are the fine-tuning we have done in the SQL or anything related to configuration manager, which have resulted into the like better performance of the SQL and getting the better availability and the health of the SQL and overall the CM environment as well. So that's the overall session. So we are going to talk about the 10 lessons, and out of that, I think 2 or 3 lessons at the end we are going to touch base on the reporting as well, but mainly focus on the SQL. With that, we'll go that overview, that to set expectation that all the learnings we are going to share is coming from our production environment. This is a high-level overview of our architecture. So if you see that we have a CAS connected to having the Intune connector and syncing with in the cloud with MSODS, which is Microsoft Directory Online Services. We have 6 primary sites now, which used to be 5, and we added the net new site is just for unified device management. It's not required, but we took a decision for adding a unified device management primary site. The reason is that we are projecting about 100,000 desktops to be, devices to be managed. So we don't want to have any other site having half devices and half PCs. The other part is that any one of your primary site is not scale up to that level because we are already close to 100K limit of the primary site. That's the other reason we decided to go to the dedicated site for the all devices in one place. But it's not required. It's just because we don't have this capacity in any one of the primary site to handle that load. So that is one reason. This is our database snapshot look like. We took that before almost like few weeks back, that how big our database is. So all the things we are going to talk about, we are talking about like CAS, which is like 1 terabyte database as of today, and we have other database based on the number of clients and number of PCs being managed, like North America or Asia. You can see how big the database we are talking about. So this is just to give you a level set that how the database sizes look like. With this, we'll quickly start with the lesson 1, and Benjamin is going to talk about the database file configuration, and I will come back in next session, lesson.
I hope it's not the next session.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Sitanshu. So the first lesson that we're going to talk about is the database file configuration. And I don't know what I did. There we go. Okay. Thanks. So this really could have been talking about the subsystem of SQL Server, and but what we're gonna talk about really by subsystem is the disk, the arrays, and also your database files. And really what you want to do is you want to do this to make sure that you maximize your performance and optimize how SQL relates with the data. So the first thing on here is the disk configuration. I saw someone trying to take a screenshot. You can get the slides later on. So with disk configuration, I wanted to put this up here for kind of a reference. These are some general settings or recommendations that we have. And we're not going to talk a ton about them, but one of the things that I do want to say is try to look at the partition alignment, that link I have there, and make sure that you plan ahead when you're creating your server if you can, because if you need to change some of these settings, it does require some downtime. So for example, the file allocation unit size on some of our databases, on some of our servers I should say, didn't have the file allocation unit size set to 64 KB, and we wanted it set at that. And so we had to take some downtime, move all the data off the drives and reconfigure them and then move it back. So it did take some time to fix that. So what we're really going to mostly focus on today is the database file configuration. And it's probably fairly obvious that you want to try to keep these on separate drives if possible. And that means your data files on one drive and your log files on another drive. If you have the luxury of creating multiple data files, then I highly recommend creating 4 to 8 data files. You don't need to do this for the log file because there really is no benefit in doing that for a log file, but you do get benefit based on how SQL actually stores and manages the data on the drives. So one of the things that I have here is if you want to do this for your config manager database, the only way that you can really do that supported is to pre-create your database with the data files. And I wrote a script that you can get up here that will create your data. Will create a database with multiple data files, set the things to the right size. You can configure it. All you have to do is put in a site code. But if you want to do a few other things like managing where you store the separate data files, then it'll also be in there, and there's pretty lengthy comments, so you can read on how you want to set it up. So give that a whirl. One thing I also did was I wrote a really awesome script that I can't share with you because it monkeyed with the database after we had installed the site. And obviously it's not supported. And if you don't want to go through the hours of fixing your site and the replication issues and the backlogs, don't do it. But it is a really awesome script.
The other thing I want to share that, as Benjamin shared, that it is nice to, if you are going to set up the first time the site, use that script because it's going to help you in the SQL performance significantly. Or if you want to use it after already the site is up and running 2012 and you want to take the leverage of splitting the files, there's a risk. Maybe we can share you after the session that what we did it, but it is not supported. It is chances of breaking, and we have to explain the management that when we have an outage. We caused the outage at Microsoft IT. We did it. We thought everything fine, and there's a post-incident review we have to do, like PIR or postmortem.
It was so awesome that it actually took a month to realize that there was a problem. It was awesome. So maybe one of these days I'll be able to fix it and get it on Toolbox, but I don't know about that. Let me know if you're interested because maybe I can get a little support there. If you're wondering, in SQL, size does matter. So make sure that you configure your database files and your log file appropriately. If you have multiple files, if you don't set them to the same size and you set your growth to the same size, then there's a very highly likely chance that you're not going to receive the benefits of actually having multiple data files. Just because of the way that SQL manages that data. It will always write to the file. It kind of does like a round robin, so to speak. I know it's extremely oversimplified. Excuse me. But what it will do is it will write to the file that has the most free disk space. So you want when it's writing. So if you can set them to the same size and the same growth, then it will actually do a much better job of managing how it writes to different files. And with your log file, I know some people were talking about log files earlier. With your log file, even though there's just one, it's very important to make sure that you pre-size it as well, and you have a good growth set. Do not leave the defaults in SQL, because the SQL defaults is usually a percentage or a very small size, and so you're going to be growing a lot. And lots of growth can actually be pretty bad for performance. So, and then lastly, with the tempdb, you want to do the same thing where you follow most of the same general recommendations of keeping this on a totally different drive if you can, having 4 to 8 data files. I know that for a while there was a recommendation that you create one data file per CPU core, but now that's been slightly changed, and the recommendation is 1 CPU core per, or 1 data file per CPU core, but not more than 8. So do we actually practice what we preach? Yes. So you can see that we have our data files on one drive, our log files on another, and we keep our backups on a totally different drive. And for our database, our config manager database specifically, we do have 4 data files, 2 on one drive and 2 on another drive. I don't have the luxury of keeping the 2 data files completely separate from the log file because we just don't have enough disks. I know. Yeah, tell me about it. But you will notice that they do have the same growth defined, and the size is very, very close. You can't see that they were sized exactly the same, but with growth they will be slightly different over time. And with tempdb, we have that on a completely separate drive as well. It's on our T drive, properly named. And you can see that we have them pre-allocated, the size to pretty much fill up the entire drive. So the data files and the log file are allocated so that they take up about 400 gigs, just so that there's no there's no growth happening and it can stay there. You also notice that I have growth disabled. It says there no auto growth. That's because I don't want it to grow to the point where it fills up the rest of the rest of the disk before it starts throwing alerts, because it can be painful to get out of that situation sometimes. So for the next lesson, I'm going to pass off to Shitanshu.
Thanks. So next thing we are going to talk about the backup and recovery. So as we know that the backup is as critical as for the high availability, and also for if you are if you consider configuration manager as a critical and important services, you need to have a backup and recovery strategy. So that is why we want to talk about the backup and what lesson we learned. So basically there are 2 options for backup. One is the old options, or still exists in Config Manager 2012, is that you enable the maintenance task, which is called backup site server, which is most commonly used backup strategy. The second one is new in Configuration Manager 2012, that you can take the database backup and just restore from the database. You can take a native SQL database backup, and yes, it is supported. And that's a snippet from the TechNet fully. Is there any difference with these 2 backups? From the restore point of view, they are identical. They are same. They do the same thing. When you back up, the only difference I will say that which we found that when you take the backup from the Configuration Manager maintenance task, it takes the inbox backup, it takes some of the registry backup, but do you use them in restore? No. It's just when you do the restore, it's just restore the database. So the point of, if you really want to look into the logs file when you backed up, if you want to look into the inbox file after the backup, that will be helpful. But how many times we will go and look into those facts? It's more important that data which we restore, which is same in both cases. So that is why at Microsoft we use the second option. We have disabled the Configuration Manager site database job. We only take the SQL native backup. So let's talk about what's the benefit of it. There's a huge benefit for us because this we talked about. We use number 2. When we take the native backup, it is more compressed than the Config Manager backup job. Its compression rate is higher. And the other advantage is that at Microsoft, like example, there are different teams, and as we use the services from the other teams, we have to pay as we use the service. For example, the backup cost, right? We pay the backup cost in the past, and what we are paying now. If we do the maths, that after doing this new style of backup with Configuration Manager, we are saving $100,000 per year. what we used to pay in the past because of the database size and how much we are compressed with the SQL backup. These are the benefits we want to reduce the backup. Also, when you have a size is smaller, it takes less time to backup, or if you are copying as a replica or somewhere else over nightly job, it takes less time to copy that backup into other place and restore it. And also, it's fully supported, so there is no doubt. So that is one of the lessons learned, which I highly recommend that use the SQL backup if you want to save. And disk is cheap, I know, there is no concept, but if you have a large database, like 1 terabyte at Microsoft, it matters a lot. The sizes grows higher and higher.
And one of the other benefits for me, anyway, particularly, is because we actually manage our own SQL servers, by doing this, I can actually back up all of my databases on there instead of just the config manager one and then running another script to back up the other ones. I can back everything up at the same time. So for me, I really like it.
Then it's more about the recovery. What we want to mention here that you might know in Configuration Manager there's a change tracking setting. What does it mean? That by default it is set to 5. So if you have a disaster or you lost the site, and if you recover within that 5 days period when you have a backup, it's going to only sync between the parent and child site for the delta part only. But if you cross that 5 days limit, it's going to send all data, like site data or global data from child site. It's a full replication, whatever the data is there on child site. For example, if I have a primary site in Asia and CAS in US, then everything is going to replicate if we cross the 5 days. What my recommendation is, do not alter the settings unless you say that it is going to take more than 5 days to recover a site, which is, I think that's rare to happen. If you have good monitoring and if you are really actively using, you should be able to restore it. The challenge is that if you change this setting from 5 days to any other days, you will be impacting your performance because it's going to log more data and the database size will go up. So I do not recommend it, but based on your disaster recovery, I think you can decide, but it's best practice to leave it at 5. CAS recovery. So we have like 2 instances in last 2 years where we have some, due to some reason like SQL is not corrupted database or something, we have to recover. The cache recovery is the most simple recovery. Even if you don't have a backup of the cache, you can bring the site as normal as it was there before. How does it work? When you have a cache lost the database, you can run the site wizard, which is site repair, and you can refer to any one of the primary site as a reference site. And that will, because all global data get replicated to all the primary site, cache only need the global data. So if you don't have a backup of the cache, you're still good. You can just point to any one of the primary site as a reference site. It will automatically ask in the wizard. It will give an option. You have any reference primary site? You select the reference primary site, and it will recover. So cache is the most simplest recovery. Primary site, you must need to have a backup. If you lose the primary site, it's all site data loss, and you need to recover everything. So I think that is more important. Other point I missed to talk about, what you lose in the cache if you recover from the primary site. Some of the status messages from the client, you won't have. That will come automatically, and the state syncs once they do resync. Secondary site recovery, there's one important thing to note that in the Configuration Manager 2012 RTM, there was no option for secondary site recovery. If you have a secondary site, for example, in London office, and you have a lot of distribution point under that secondary site in London, and due to some reason, hardware or something, you lost the secondary site, the only way to come back, you have to reinstall the secondary site, attach all the DPs again, and send all the packages again. That's a very, very big pain for the administration and also WAN cost to send all the packages again. Now, if you install the SP1, we have that is fixed, and what you can do, secondary site recovery is supported. So you can recover the secondary site without any data loss, and the SQL backup is not recommended on secondary site because it's a very small data and you can have full reinitialization. So secondary site, if you are using Configuration Manager, make sure you have a SP1 so that if you have even disaster recovery, you can recover the secondary site as to the normal. With this, we are going to lesson number 3. This is about more about that. This lesson started that we have like 20-25 people who are working on the different aspects of Configuration Manager, maybe software distribution, packaging, and oftenly their complaint is that, oh, I created something and my collection is still not replicated to the primary site, or I don't see the update happening, or why the replication link is degraded or failed. and we have to go and explain again that why the replication link is going back and forth. And we did a service improvement plan with our team. And the goal was that how do we improve the replication link status from, like, for example, we used to have a 90%, from 90 to 98% or 99% of green status for replication link. So this, all things we are going to talk about is driven from how to make replication as active as possible. So first thing, we looked into our discoveries. At Microsoft, we have 7 domains in the main forest, and the way that we used to do a configuration of discoveries, we didn't do a good job. We have probably running all the discoveries of all the domains in a different primary site, but probably at the same time. So what used to happen, all the DDRs coming at each primary site and getting processed, and whenever it happens, it used to bring replication link degraded because there's so much DDR or DRS queue buildup, and it takes a lot of time. So we started looking into the discovery, that how much time these discoveries are really taking for one domain and the other domain, and we found that why don't we stagger it? So we make sure that until one domain discovery is finished, we are not starting the discovery of another domain. Whether it's a full discovery or delta, we have configured in a way that there is no overlapping. So we allowed the system to process all the discovery records before we ask to more discoveries to come. In that case, we are not hammering the servers. So that's one thing we did. The other part we also did that other than discoveries, if you have Exchange connector, that also caused the sync. So that we make sure that Exchange connector is not running at the same time when we are running the discovery. So those things we fill. When we did this, we have seen this improvement in our backlog processing and replication link status and how the server is performing. The other part is that this is applicable to like an enterprise scenario where you have 100,000 or 200,000 clients. There are a lot of maintenance tasks whose default settings are set for like 70 to 80% of you, where you have a smaller environment. But for larger enterprise, there will be some of the maintenance tasks will be running more frequently than you need it, or they are running more frequently than probably they are not even finishing within their time. So we were looking all the maintenance tasks running and looking into that whether this task finish in 1 hour or 2 hours before it runs the next schedule. So we found there are 2 tasks in our environment. This is applicable to MSIT, which was like, if you read it, like some update group status summarizer and some update status summarizer task. These were tasks were default set to run every 1 hour, and they were never finishing in 1 hour. So what is the use of running every 1 hour and hammering the system? So we looked into that, and what we can optimize, we changed from 1 hour to 4 hours. I'm not saying that could be applicable to you. The message is that look into the maintenance tasks which are running too frequent and may not be completing, or you don't need it too frequent. You need to set it, because these are very heavy to the SQL. When they run it, if you look into the SQL query performance analyzer, and you can find that how expensive these tasks are there. So look into that. Do you need all these tasks at the same time, or how you can optimize this? So that is one thing we did it. Other miscellaneous configuration is about that indexes. So Benjamin is going to talk about the next lesson. My message with indexing is that you must do it, and if you are doing the indexing job, monitor it. Oftenly what we have found in the past that we know that indexing job is running, but when it fails, nobody knows. After 2 or 3 weeks, we see the SQL performance is getting degraded, and then, oh, indexing job didn't run from last 3 weeks. Now we have a process in place and automation. If the indexing job fails on the weekend, we know that it's going to be kicked off manually, someone is going to do it. So team is assigned, roles are assigned, and we have automation which will alert us in the ticket form, and we know that indexing job is as important as any other thing to be done. So we take it very seriously, the indexing job on the database. The other thing this is like, we did it recently, like 2 months back when we are looking this, like, some deployment has a feature or settings where you can enable the randomization. For example, when you do the patch compliance and you say that I have a deadline Tuesday or after 9 days, at the deadline, at the same time, all the state messages from the client start coming at the same time because they meet the deadline. So there is an option where you can enable as randomization, so that not all the clients get the state message at the same time to the server. So they are randomized for an hour, so there's a delay in getting the state messages. So that is something we enable. I won't say that I can't quantify that how much benefit we got it, but we are seeing some of them, but it's still we have to run for a longer period to justify that how much benefit we got it. But if it is there, we just use it, and also we are seeing that the state message backlog is not as much as we used to see in the past, especially on the deadline when all the clients start getting patched when they have not patched themselves. With all this, what we have achieved, our replication link, how we are capturing, will show the reports. We used to be like 90 to 94%. Now we are at 98%. So if you measure that how many times our replication link says green and active, it is 98%. With whether the patch to stay or whatever we are doing with the configuration manager. So that's what we achieve with all this fine tuning and settings. And what it boils it to the SQL, because everything we are doing, just making sure that we are optimizing the SQL resources and using it in an efficient way. Let's do the lesson 4.
All right. Thanks, Shatanshu. So, excuse me, as Shatanshu mentioned, the database index maintenance is really not an option. You really do need to do it. And so what we're going to talk about is the reason why. And that's because when you have an index, it's basically how SQL stores the data for each table, in an oversimplified way of stating that. But when they do that, when they get fragmented, then they start to get bigger, and it takes more resources for SQL to pull that information out of the database, right? So when they get fragmented, you need to so-called defrag them like you do a traditional disk. This will, like I mentioned before, this will improve all the performance, or not all the performance, but it will improve performance greatly. So you really have two options. The one is the config manager out-of-box index maintenance job. And as I started putting this slide together, I was actually surprised myself to find that the out-of-box maintenance plan or maintenance job is actually much smarter than I had thought it was. I had thought that it was just going to blindly rebuild every single index in there, and so that's why I have always kind of stayed away from it, because I don't really see the benefit in just rebuilding everything unless you have a small environment. But in a larger environment, you want to target what you're going to really rebuild or what you're going to reorganize. And so I have some of the information here, how it determines what to do. So that's actually really good, and you do want to make sure that you have something that's smart, whatever your index maintenance plan involves. The one thing to call out is that at least in Config Manager 2012, this is disabled by default. So if you choose to use the out-of-box plan, make sure that you enable it and configure it to the run when you need it and want it to do that. The next option that you have is to build your own custom index maintenance plan, or use something or buy something that would do that for you. There are third-party tools, and there are also some free tools out there but if you'd go with this plan, the reason why you would want to look at this and customizing it is that you can configure exactly what you do. You can determine which indexes need to be rebuilt or reorganized based on their fragmentation percentages. And one thing that you want to take into consideration is also your page count. If you actually, there's a white paper I think we have at the end of the slides there. It'll talk about index maintenance, and they did a study and found that if you have indexes that have fewer than 1,000 pages, then there's really not a whole lot of benefit from it. So one of the things to look at is the page size. And we already talked about this. Make sure you do it. There's not an option. Now, what we do is we have a free solution from a guy named Ola Hollengren, and he's been in SQL Server Magazine for a number of years and won some awards because he provides this free solution that's really good. For myself, as I sat down, I was going to write my own script again and started studying his, and decided that it was much more worthwhile to use his than to rebuild my own. It's very configurable. You can configure it to your heart's content pretty much, and it's pretty awesome. What we do is we run it every weekend so that we're off hours, and I hid a slide actually because I didn't think that we'd have time to talk about statistics, but I will just say that we also run statistics nightly. It's a less impact, and if you guys want to talk about statistics afterwards, please come and talk to me afterwards. But statistics is also another thing that you do want to take a look at and try to organize into your indexing maintenance plan, because in The statistics also help with the performance, but they also it also affects your query plans that are cached on the server. So, what we do are some stats on our CAS site. Our indexing job actually takes about a day and a half right now to complete because of how busy things are, but that is down from 2 or 3 days. I'll be talking about that when we talk about database size in a few more lessons here. Our statistics job takes about an hour and a half or so. And what that tells you is one of the things they also like about Ola's his plan that he has together that you can use for free is that it also will log, if you so choose, it will log into another table so that you can take a look at these things so that you can see how things are performing, which tables or indexes are taking a really long time, and you can start to target things differently. So for us, our next steps are to determine if we can configure things a little bit differently so that we can decrease how long it takes but still get the performance out of it. So lesson 5 is moving a config manager database, and there are several reasons that you may need to do something like this. In our case, we had a couple of primary sites where the resources on the server were just not enough. So they weren't performing as well as our other primary sites. In one of the cases, it was also a really old server, so we were in the process of getting new servers, and so we had to move the database. That is one of the benefits of having remote SQL as opposed to local. That's just for you, Brian. So some of the prerequisites are to make sure that you have SP1 CU1 installed. That's because there is a known issue that it will fix in this case, and we ran into this because we didn't have CU1 installed for SP1, and that is it actually says here, site replication fails after a site database is restored to a new server. And what that is there's a integer big int conversion error that it fixes. So, and it has to do with change tracking, which is how all of the replication works in DRS. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is if you're going to move your database to another server, when you restore your database, your users and your user permissions are all intact because that's part of your database. However, your logins, which are part of the SQL logins, they're not there. So you want to make sure you back that up and restore that to the new server as well. And I've written a script that you can use. It's a pretty simple one to just get all of your SQL logins and your login permissions. And it's also smart in that it if those permissions already exist, you're not going to rerun them or run into any errors. So feel free to grab this script and use that in your scenario. Now, in our case, we also have the susDB on the same SQL server. And so in our case, we wanted to make sure that we moved the WSUS content as well as the susDB or the WSUS database. So if you have other databases on there and you're getting rid of the service, make sure you keep those in mind.
One thing I want to clarify that here, just to WSS content may not be necessarily for your scenario. We do something differently at Microsoft where we manage WSS independently as well, which is not supported. So that's why we move the content. So it may not be necessarily, just FYI.
Right. And the main point in that is that if there's another database on there, make sure you're thinking of that database and what you have to do to move that one as well. So some of the lessons learned specifically for moving the database, like I mentioned before, is make sure you have SP1 CU1 installed because it will cause that you. In our case, we had to do a reinitialization of our replication data, and the other thing that to keep in mind is I had told the team when we moved the databases, I wanted them to keep the old SQL server turned off because I didn't want anything to make a connection to that SQL server. In my mind, once you turn it off and you move the database, we should be able to turn it up. The problem with that is there are certificates on the old server that need to be moved to the new server, and that's done when you do a site resource or a site maintenance plan. Yeah. So you have to make sure that you turn that SQL server back on so that it will pull those certificates over. And then you can, after it's completely moved, then you can turn that server off or service. The other items that I have listed here we're not going to talk about, but they have to do with the fact that we were offline for the better part of the weekend, and so we ran into some other, just some performance issues and something to be aware of. So really the takeaway from that is if you're going to move your database, plan it and make sure you have all your prereqs installed and taken care of, and do it as quickly as you can. So I'm not going to go through this slide in depth, but this is just kind of a high-level step-by-step guide that we used when we took care of our database. So this is more for reference if you wanted to take a look at maybe what the steps you might want to take. And now database size. There are a few things that will increase the size of your database. I think that Config Manager 2012 is going to increase. It's going to be a little bit bigger than your 2007 environment. At least that's what our experience has been. But in addition to that, there are a few things that are factors in that. And there are, it's what your inventory settings are. That's pretty common. That's true in 2007 as well. There's some additional logging that happens and stored in SQL, and how long you also keep your history information. So first of all, I want to say that big doesn't necessarily mean bad, and good doesn't necessarily mean small. It really depends on whether you're, at least in my opinion, if you're using the data and it's helping you, then it's okay. But if it's taking up a lot of space and you're not doing anything with it, then maybe it's time to take a look at it. And the reasons for that are your database backups, your index maintenance, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides, as well as, in our case on our CAS, the DBCC check DB, I realize now that may have been another thing to talk about, but it is something that's recommended that you do on a frequent basis. Most DBAs will do that for you if you have that luxury. What they do is they run this to make sure that your database is consistent, there aren't any other issues that they need to be aware of. And in our case, this wasn't actually working on our CAS because our database size was large, and the free disk space that's required to perform the CheckDB is pretty significant when it's active. If your database is offline, then it's not a big deal. But in our case, we couldn't actually get it to complete after a while. So the first thing you want to do, or at least in our case, is we wanted to take a look and see what was taking up the most space. And yet again, another script. I like to write scripts much more than I like to present, apparently. So I wrote another script that actually uses an out-of-box stored procedure in Config Manager. There are other things in SQL out-of-box, but I like the one that they have because it already puts it into megabytes instead of just kilobytes and pages. So anyway, go ahead, use this, and it'll tell you what's taking up what amount of space in your database. So on ours, what we did was we took a look, and our top 5 tables are these 5 right here. And so you might be thinking to yourself, well, so what? What do we do now? In our case, what we did was we saw these 2 tables that were talking about DRS, and we wanted to take a look at these to see, because that's about 125 gigs of space, just those 2 tables, to see if we could actually do something about that. So, as you may have guessed, we did, and this is the before and the after. So beforehand, it's about 125 gigs of space. After our grooming, and we're going to talk about what we did to groom that, we're at about 30 megs. And that's pretty significant, especially when we talk about the indexing plan. So as you see on that last column there, it took about 30 hours for us to index just these 2 tables. That's a lot of time. And so by doing this, now it's not even a blip. It doesn't matter. So then we can worry about the ones that we really care about. Now, I know this is a busy slide, so really what this is saying is, what we did for this is, the DRS sent messages and received messages, what those tables do, they store, based on a registry key value, it will track all of the replication data for those specific groups in that value, in that reg key. Every single message that is sent or received for that specific group, it will store in these tables. So for us, it actually says here that the defaults are site control data and configuration data. We had actually over time put a few other replication groups in there. We thought, hey, this would be really good. We'll track this. It might be interesting. But what we found when I started looking at it is, and I do have a script, but I didn't add it in here. So if you want, you can ask me afterwards. To determine if you are using this, if you want to see how much of that space is assigned to different replication groups, I found that 99.9% of all that data, of the 125 gigs, was contributed to configuration data. It's very noisy. So what we did was then update that to just have site control data. As you know, the site control file, quote unquote, is now in the database, and replication data. Excuse me. So, so after we made that update, then we ran that script again to see what was taking up the most space. And the reason we do that is so that, I know what you're going to ask. So I know what he's going to ask. He wants me to tell you what I lose by getting rid of the configuration data replication group. What that is if there's a replication issue, for example, if you find that there's a record on your primary site that's not on your CAS, you could actually take a look, assuming that it's in a specific replication group and you're tracking that replication group, you could take a look at these tables to see, okay, was it sent, was it received, kind of find out where the failure was. But in the end, the way to resolve the issue is always the same. So you're still going to either have to update that primary key so that it gets stored in change tracking and then gets replicated again, or do a reinitialization. So in my case, I felt that I'd rather have the time spent. If I know what I have to do to recover, it's probably not as important to me to know whether it was sent or received, where the failure exactly was. There's just too much to worry about in day-to-day life. And the other question I see that you getting ready to ask is, how many times did I use those tables in troubleshooting? I never did. So, good. Did I hit them right?
Yes, you got it.
I saw you looking right there.
Yeah.
So after we did the grooming, we ran this again, and these were our next top 5 tables. And so really what we can do now is take a look, okay, well, are there things that we can do now? Like for the logs table, there's a maintenance task that determines how long you keep that data. So we could evaluate, do we want to keep it for less time? We could also take a look at the services data and history tables that's in inventory. Are we actually using that data? If so, that's great. We'll go on to the next 5. But if we're not, perhaps we could turn it off or do some grooming there as well. And then replication, when to panic. This is always a fun one. We found that in our environment, the state would change from active. I know that Shitanshu talked a little bit about this already. It would change from active to degraded to failed and back and forth. And really what would happen is we'd be running around, throughout the day trying to figure out what was wrong every single time. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how that state changes, how you define that, and then you can make your own determination of when you need to panic. And I'll give a little bit of a recommendation. So what this is when a replication group takes longer to finish processing. So I'll take an example. So let's say your CAS has received a sync message, which by definition is a group of messages from your primary site. And when it receives this sync message and it starts processing through, it will actually communicate with the primary site at the same time if it needs to say, hey, I'm working on this. What will happen is your link will be active until the point which it takes longer than the defined threshold of degraded. If it takes longer, let's say it passes that threshold, it will then flip the state to degraded. If the state then moves past the time frame required for your failed threshold, then it doesn't automatically go to failed. This is something very important to keep in mind. If it's past that threshold, but the sites are still communicating and it's saying, hey, I'm working on your data, hey, I'm working on your data, and they're still talking, it will just say that they're degraded, because really what it's saying is, hey, I've got the data, I'm working on it, I'm just taking a long time, or a longer time. Whereas in the failed state, if they're not receiving those communications back and forth, then it will go to failed. So the thresholds that we talked about are configurable through the console. The defaults are 12 for degraded and 24 for failed. And if you see on the slide, it says retries. It doesn't say minutes. So it's something that's very key to think about. That doesn't mean that it's always 12 minutes. After 12 minutes, I'm going to be degraded. It's a 12 retry. And what that really means, we'll talk about it here. So what that really means is that for every replication group, there's a table of vReplication data, or a view. And in this view, there's a column called sync interval. And every replication group has its own sync interval. This means how often it will replicate its data to the other site. So what you need to do is take your sync interval and multiply that by your thresholds in retries, and that will essentially give you what your threshold is in minutes. And as an example, we took two different replication groups. Site control data, it has a sync interval of 1 because it's by the config manager says this is pretty important data for us, so we want to make sure that things are very up to date. Whereas hardware inventory, if it's a few minutes behind, probably not the worst thing in the world. So it's got a sync interval of 5. So if you have the defaults of 12 and 24 defined, then you're going to be 24 minutes for in the failed state. It'll be 24 minutes for site control data and 120 minutes for your hardware inventory before it goes to the failed state. Very key to keep that in mind, how that works. So really the first thing you need to do is to determine what you think is an appropriate, quote-unquote backlog. If your site is in the degraded state, based on the intervals, and what I would do is I base it on the least common denominator, right? So anything with a sync interval of 1 is your most important data. And you might want to think, okay, well, is 12 minutes or 24 minutes, is that okay? Do I want to see the state changing all the time in these scenarios, or do I want to increase it a little bit? In our case, we increased it to 20 for the degraded and 35 for failed, and that's been it helps us know that, oh, okay, it's a little bit longer. It's not all the time for us in our environment because it's such a big environment. So this is how we've defined it. Degraded means don't panic yet. It means you want to keep an eye on it. Make sure you know which replication group is in that degraded state, and you keep an eye on it to see, okay, has it been degraded for a few minutes or has it been degraded for several hours? If it's been several hours, then there's probably something else wrong, and you want to find the root cause. Do you have an indexing job that's running in the middle of the day that's creating blockings? Do you have other discovery schedules going on? Are you doing patching? Whatever it might be, you might want to take a look just so you know, oh, okay, this is the impact, and you may be able to find out how to tweak things. As for failed, I say panic, because you should actually already know ahead of time. You should know when it's degraded and how long it's been there. So if failed comes up on you and you didn't know about it, you better start panicking. So troubleshoot that immediately. Make sure you have your troubleshooting guides put together ahead of time. And one thing that I want to mention is RLA, the Replication Link Analyzer, is a great tool. Use that in both scenarios. But when you're using it for the failed, especially if it's in a failed state, it may actually ask you if you want to reinitialize your data. Make sure before you just start clicking OK, like my wife does when she sees things, and we get viruses on our computer, that you that you actually read what it says so that you know whether you really want to reinitialize data. My wife will be very happy that I referenced her. Okay, so the last lesson that I'll be covering is database replica for reporting. I now know why Steve Ballmer has like a bottle of honey, because it does get working on your throat. So some of the reasons for creating a replica database, and by a replica in our case, what I mean is we take, as we mentioned before, we take backups every day, and every day we also restore those backups, at least for our CAS, onto another server, so that we have, because we have multiple organizations and groups that are always asking for data, and I want to be helpful and give them that data, but I don't want them hitting our production site all the time. And so we have this server that we can say, okay, it's a day-old data, but it's fairly good for you, and they're happy with that. So they take the data from that instead of having these long-running ETLs. Especially, if you saw in the database size section, our installed software table is enormous, and they always are very interested in that data. So they're pulling that data over all the time. So it's much better for us to just have a replica for them to report off of. The other benefit to this is you're people like me who like to test in production. You can try to force them onto this replica so that they can write their queries there without impacting production. This is a slide that talks about how we restore that every day. We're not going to go through the step-by-step. It's more for reference if some general ideas of how you may want to take a look at of doing this in your scenario if you wanted to take a look at this. There are some other possible steps that you might want to include that we're not currently including, and that's adding indexes. If you have specific reports or queries that people run, you could, because it's not your production database, you could actually create another index that would help that query perform a lot better. And no one can complain about it being supported or not. The other benefits to this aren't just for reporting. There's a SQL god named Kimberly Tripp, and she's got this. She's got a phrase that says, "You don't have a backup until you've restored it," and it's very, very true. Because the worst time to find out that your backup is corrupt is when you need to restore that backup. So one of the things that this does for us is every day we get to validate our DR scenario. We have that backup, and it's also got the redundancy, so we have another server where things are stored. And as I mentioned before with the database size, we weren't able to do that CheckDB, or the DBCC CheckDB. So one of the benefits of that is when we restore, you can actually run that on this replica server, and we can see if there's the inconsistencies. And because it's in a database for people to read and do reporting on, we were able to actually get that done. It runs and it completes and it helps us validate our databases. So with that, I'll turn the time back over to Shitanshu.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good. Next topic is about the high availability and disaster recovery. So as we mentioned that we manage Microsoft IT as an operations and engineering team, we do also manage another environment in Microsoft which is separate than Microsoft IT. You might have heard about the Microsoft retail stores, the stores for all our retail stores. We manage their configuration manager environment as well. It's not as big, like 300,000. They have like 3,000 POS devices or point of sales devices. They have a requirement for us that they need a high availability and disaster recovery scenario for configuration manager. So they were looking for both scenario to meet. So basically, we build this design for them, and right now this design in the migration phase. So we will be piloting and we'll be going in production by end of next month. But this design exists and it is working for us. So that's what we are going to show you, that what is the SQL design look like for high availability and disaster recovery scenario. So let's imagine we have a data center 1, which we have this 2 SQL server in data center 1, and you have a primary site. Then we have another data center 2, where we have other 2 SQL servers. So we have 2 SQL server in data center 1, 2 SQL server in data center 2. We did the Windows failover clustering for that scenario, which is geolocated, 2 Windows failover clustering. On top of it, we did have a SQL clustering on both failover cluster, and we did the always on availability group and synchronous. Now you'll be wondering that why we are doing always on, which is not supported. We are using always on only for database mirroring, which works, nothing else. If you do more than that, it probably will not work or fail. We are only using always on group, which is a new feature in SQL 2012 for mirroring option. And we'll tell about that, what is the benefit and what we are getting it. And
I had to.
This is in
I had to try it. I really had to. So it's not supported, but I really wanted to try it out. So that's one of the reasons.
Okay. And let's talk about that, what we have done it, and by using always on, what doesn't work and what works, and we can talk about. But this is in production right now for retail store with 300,000 machines there, and it's working pretty well so far. When we migrate more machines, we'll come to, but this is our design for high availability. And
how many machines?
3,000.
Oh, okay.
So 3,000. Now let's go into what we're doing. For high availability, as I mentioned, the SQL clustering is doing that for us. So we have geolocated 2 SQL clustering going on, and they are replicated together. So anytime the database is replicated across the 2 data centers, and even in each data center, we have 2 SQL servers. For disaster recovery, this is the main thing where we are, this is the main thing for the SQL, where we are doing the always group on, what is giving us like SQL cluster, the replicated, plus the other thing which always on group, what we are taking benefit, or if you really use always on, the failover is automatic. We can't do it in configuration manager scenario because that will break and that's not supported, and even it will not work. What we are doing is that our disaster recovery scenario is that if data center 1 goes down, my database is already there in data center 2. We will do a manual failover, which is nothing, just do a site reset. My database is already there in data center 2. I just need to have a primary site, which could be SCVMM, high available VM, so it can be migrated there. It could be a matter of 1 or 2 hours. So the benefit we are not able to take with always on, that automatic failover, that's okay. That's not supported. But what we are doing is just making sure the database is available in data center 2, and we do the site reset whenever the disaster recovery will happen, and that site reset will migrate the site provider and will set up. So it will be 1 or 2 hours work which we will do for, but that is working for us. So, and we also validated this disaster recovery scenario and tested it before we're sharing with you guys. So this is what we are doing for high availability and disaster recovery scenario. So the last lesson needs some overview before we go to the lesson. So that's the last lesson on the reporting. So I want to give you an overview of the reporting. We have like 10 minutes left, so we'll take 5 minutes on this, and we have a 5 minutes Q&A. So just to give you an overview what reporting look like as a service at Microsoft, it's an evolving service. There's so much demand from the reporting from configuration manager, and there are so many groups at Microsoft. If starting from the HR or asset inventory group is there, or licensing group is there. There are so many groups who needs data from configuration manager. So it's always high demand, and that reporting is, and also the security team for the compliance and vulnerabilities with the SCEP data. There are a lot of folks who are interested in the database. As Benjamin already mentioned, that we also take feed from the other things. So we have like a BI data, which is business intelligence database, data warehouse, where we take the feed from the configuration manager database. We take the feed from the internal tool, which is called HeadTracks. It keeps all the HR data. We merge that data together with configuration manager. And we have some feeds about Active Directory if we want to take more information. So that's all compiled together in the data warehouse. So that if someone wants that, oh, in this organization under this, how many PCs are there, and that business intelligence be worked out there. So that's the way we do it. And we have Power Pivot-based, some tables, and reporting-based compliance. We already talked about the replication group, that replica of database is available. So all the external to our team, who is not the config manager admin, take the feed from the data, which is like every nightly backup and restore. We have mixed access. If people who needs a real-time access, they only get the access to the production database. If they don't need a business justification for the real time, then they go to the replica database. So that's where we have defined the security groups and who will get in this security group. So they are not allowing that both places until unless there is a necessary. If you look into that, how many jobs we do for all this compilation of the business logic data, we have one data warehouse and 186 ETL, which is a SQL jobs running to extract the data and transfer this data into that data warehouse. We have 2 cubes built in. These cubes are one for patching because there are a lot of patching compliance data which customization happen at Microsoft and security teams looks into that. So we have a customized cube, and operating system deployment, there's another cube to track the failures and reporting. How many reports we have customized? We have 400 plus custom reports created, and it's not created like in a week or years. It's been like a couple of years, 4-5 years built in, and that's what we have. This is like overview of that one. What we are going to next in the future for reporting, these are the few things we are working on. Today we have multiple places, like one SQL server is there for data warehouse and there's a replica database. We want to have one big server so that we have one source of truth, not people are, oh, for this data you go to XYZ and this data go, that we want to consider and have one server in the future. Also, we are working on the dashboard that as there's more and more modern device management, or you can say unified device management coming, we have built a lot of dashboard on the patch compliance, on the application deployment, operating system deployment. There's a high demand from our executive that how many devices has enrolled, how many are Windows RT, Surface, or iOS device in the environment. So we're working on the dashboard for the modern devices as we speak there. So that is the number one priority for us, we want. We also want to have the front-end reporting catalog as one catalog so that between the business intelligence report or BI report, you have to go to different folder or different tree together, and for out-of-box report, you have to go different. It's not very easy for the end users or reporting consumer to find where to have look to it. So we want to have a better front-end where they can go and navigate easily what type of report you are looking forward, whether it's come from the out-of-box or whether it's come from the custom report. So we're working on the centralized catalog of reporting so we can do it. And the last thing is we are talking about the modern tiles and modern way. So we are also customizing, and one of the development team is working on the dashboard which will be on tile, and that tile will turn into red or green based on the availability. So we online for our monitoring team, they can have the hallway dashboard which will display the tiles based on the availability of every groups, or maybe the site is functioning or all the service state. So that is something we are working, that how we can provide the executive dashboard. Like for example, our GM has some of 3 or 4 LCDs, and each of the services he manages have one dashboard for it, and it automatically rotates and refresh, and it also have the comments which anybody can put that white is red and white is green. So that's what we are working as customization. So this is all about reporting before we go to the reporting lesson learned. So we did some custom reports on the replication and why we did it, and we want to share those reports with you. The first one is that SSRS report. This we have shared in the past, but I just wanted to bring for the folks who have not seen that. So as Benjamin talked about when to panic, when not to panic, there are a lot of times you can't go to every time to the console and look into whether it's active or degraded. So what we have made easy life for the configuration manager admins, there is a SSRS-based report which is being sent every day. It keeps track of all the secondary sites or primary to secondary site. If you see the bottom of the report, it has the DRS queue also. It also tells about how much backlog is there in any one of the queue for site to site. So this is give a high awareness to all the team members, and they get this report every morning and they know. We have already blogged about this report, and it is available as an SSR RDL file. So you can just download it and upload in your cache server, and you can get the same report. So that is one of the replication report we use for our config manager admin. So this is another one where how do we derive that replication was 94% or 98% available? This is the way we have built some custom solutions. So there is like a script which Benjamin wrote it. It just logged the status in a custom table, and what it logs about whether replication is active, degraded, or failed. And we run it like 10 or 15, every 5-10 minutes. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes, that's something. And based on that, we have this SSRS report, which tells about that which site is available and these are the drill down report. If you click, it will also tell that from this time to this time it was degraded. So pretty much same as if you are using the operations manager, you can get the same view of it. But we wanted a SSRS point of view, and we wanted to most customize, so we built our own. But if you are using Ops Manager, you can get it. Also, we blogged about this one. Not the blog, but we have a report uploaded on the SkyDrive, so you can download the RDL file and the code as well, which will create this database in the backend, and the table will populate this everything. So you have the code of automation as well as the RDL file. So you can drill down, and these reports will tell you that how the replication is doing, which site is good, where the problem is there. Because this report helps us in navigating, probably the discovery is not good on one of the sites, so we need to look into that, what is going on. So this is a good pointer to start with. With this, I would like to ask you guys that, did you find this useful? Good. Thank you.
Good.
There's a few more sessions happening from our team, related content, and we are open for the, these are the resources Benjamin talked about, that white paper on defragmentation and rebuild indexing, and some of our team information here. Please give us the eval, don't forget, so that we can further improve the topics that what you would like to hear from us.
We have some time. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we have time, 8 minutes for Q&A. Use the microphone so that everyone can hear the question.
Oh, boy.
Uh-oh. We ask him to shut off the microphone when Brand comes. No, go ahead.
I'll cut this mic. Okay, so high availability is not supported, but it's kind of cool. And I'm interested too. There were some caveats. One is, like, could you only have one provider? You couldn't have multiple providers, is that right?
No, we have only, you can do multi-provider. We have only one provider set up. And the way we were thinking to do it, SCVMM, where you can migrate the same VM to another data center. And the provider will be like a very small VM. It shouldn't be a big one. So it may take an hour or something to transfer that VM from DC1 to DC2. But that is something that is a feature of SCVMM, high availability.
And just to clarify, high availability is supported. You'll get that in SQL clustering. So you can now have active, passive, you've always been able to do active, passive clusters, but you can also now do active, active clusters. That's also supported in Config Manager 2012.
Right.
So your high availability is supported. It's just how you determine your database mirroring.
And that second question on that was there, did you also have to go to full recovery mode, not simple?
Yes.
And that grew the database size? The TempDB got big from that? Yes,
no, TempDB won't necessarily get big from increasing from simple to full recovery model, but your log file will get bigger because it depends on how often you take log backups. But if you're taking, in our scenario, it's a relatively small environment. It's only like 3,000 machines. And so in our case, because we're taking backups every day, because it's either a backup or a log backup, we didn't feel the need to take more frequent log backups. So a daily backup is plenty, and it does increase your log size, but not significant enough for us to worry about.
And are you ever going to consider doing it for your CAS?
No comment. I don't know if I can say anything, so I don't know. I'll just say I'm not sure yet.
Yes.
Would you be interested, or would you consider releasing details on the data warehouse you mentioned for the patch cube?
Yeah.
Because I think there'd be a lot of interest in the community for that.
So yeah, but we can definitely do something.
That's
like
a good.
That,
We'll take a note, and we'll share the business card here. So just contact us, remind us, and there are also in the patch cube right now. The way this setup is a lot of internal business logic. So we have to work on it. That what information may not be relevant to you at all, like the security. But we can definitely share a blog about it. That's a good idea. We didn't thought about it.
That's great.
Good question.
We run our SQL environment in a virtual environment. So I guess in terms of best practices for disk partitioning, for the log, for the temp DB and all that stuff, again, it's coming from one large storage array. What is the best practice for SQL in a virtual environment for disk partitioning?
Lots of IOPS.
Okay. So I mean, can we just lump everything into one LUN, or do we still need to separate the disk?
I think that it really depends on how your storage scenario, what your storage scenario looks like, right? how many disks you've got on there, how many spindles, are they SSDs, are they, there's so many factors in that I don't want to, basically really the only thing I can really say definitively in that scenario is make sure you have lots of IOPS. Okay. I know that's super generic, but
No, that makes sense.
yeah. And if you want, we can chat a little bit afterwards too. But
And one thing, when we are not using the SAN, so we cannot comment exactly, but in next 3-4 months, we are planning to migrate everything what we use on the dash drive to the SAN. And working with the SAN guys, what I heard that they always talks in the lunch, like, hey, how many? And one more parameter they will be useful for them. They also have input for the disk IOPS. So they ask that how many disk IOPS you needed. I think we calculated that we are going with the 5,000 disk IOPS requirement for them. So that is a good benchmark to start with. It means we reviewed with our performance team and everyone said that this will be awesome. So if you really want to optimize, and 5,000 disk IOPS will be high tier 1 kind of thing.
yeah. Any other questions?
That's good.
All right.
Thank
so,
you.
yeah, please, if you do have questions that you didn't want to ask, feel free to come up and talk to me anytime, or shoot me an email. You can get, I'm sure they have our information somewhere.
And we have some business card here, so feel free to, if you have question later, feel free to drop to us an email, and we will help. We'll be glad to help you out.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much.